I found HOA Karen's Mercedes in my workshop, so I welded the doors shut. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I'd like to ask one small favor. Tell me where you're watching from by leaving the name of your city or country in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel, and I truly appreciate every single one of you for being here. Thank you so much. Now, let's meet the man at the center of this story. The biggest mistake a bully can make is believing that a quiet man has run out of options. The sharp scent of hot steel still lingered in the air when I unlocked the front door of my workshop at 6:12 on a rainy Tuesday morning. The concrete floor echoed beneath my work boots, and somewhere in the back, the old compressor hissed as it bled off the last bit of pressure from the night before. For 20 years, that sound had meant the same thing to me. Honest work, honest customers, honest money. My name is Luke Harrison, and restoring classic American cars isn't just my job. It's the only thing I've ever been truly good at. My father taught me how to weld before he ever trusted me behind the wheel of a truck. He used to say that a clean weld tells you everything you need to know about the person holding the torch. Patient hands build strong things. Angry hands ruin them. I've carried those words with me every day since I inherited Harrison Metal Works, a modest workshop sitting just outside the Willow Creek Estate subdivision. Most mornings started the same way. Fresh coffee, the smell of motor oil, country radio humming through an old speaker mounted above my toolbox. Customers dropping off Mustangs, Camaros, old pickup trucks, and the occasional Corvette that deserved another chance at life. I liked predictable mornings. They usually stayed that way until the Homeowners Association president decided she needed another reason to remind the neighborhood that she believed she owned everyone else's time. Rebecca Whitmore had been running Willow Creek Estates for almost 6 years. Perfect hair, designer sunglasses, white Mercedes-Benz S-Class that never seemed to have a speck of dust on it. She walked through the subdivision like every sidewalk had been poured in her honor. If someone painted their mailbox the wrong shade of black, she noticed. If a garbage can stay outside 15 minutes too long, she noticed. If my customers parked along the public street while waiting for repairs, somehow she noticed that too. Over the past year, she'd mailed me warning letters about everything from the sound of my air compressor to the appearance of delivery trucks parked outside my own property. The funny part was that my workshop wasn't even governed by her HOA. My land had been commercial property decades before the subdivision existed. County records made that perfectly clear. Unfortunately, confidence doesn't always care about county records. Rebecca believed authority was something you simply declared loudly enough until everyone else accepted it. I usually ignored her. Arguing with someone determined to misunderstand you is like trying to polish rust. You waste time and still end up dirty. That Tuesday looked like it might finally be different. The rain had kept the streets quiet. My first customer wasn't scheduled until 8. I was looking forward to finishing the frame restoration on a 1969 Mustang that had occupied bay number 2 for almost 3 months. I reached for the light switch, and the fluorescent fixtures flickered to life one row at a time. Bay 1, empty. Bay 2, Mustang exactly where I'd left it. Bay 3 wasn't empty. My hand froze on the switch. Sitting perfectly centered between my welding table and the hydraulic lift was a pearl white Mercedes S-Class with custom chrome wheels reflecting every ceiling light in the building. Water dripped from its hood onto my concrete floor in slow, steady taps. I didn't recognize the parking job because no customer had permission to drive inside my shop after hours. The engine was cold. The keys were gone. Every door was locked. For several long seconds, I simply stood there listening to the rain tapping against the metal roof while the smell of wet asphalt drifted through the open doorway. Then I noticed the folded envelope tucked neatly beneath one windshield wiper. My name was written across the front in thick black marker. I already knew exactly whose handwriting I was looking at before I picked it up. The envelope smelled faintly of expensive perfume, the kind that tried a little too hard to announce itself before the person wearing it even entered the room. I broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper printed with the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association letterhead. It was not a repair request. It was not an apology. It was not even a question. Rebecca Whitmore had written exactly 3 sentences. She informed me that her Mercedes required immediate cosmetic work after what she described as an unfortunate parking lot incident. She instructed me to complete the repairs before the end of the week because In her words, maintaining the appearance of community leadership benefited everyone. Then she added the line that made me smile instead of getting angry. She expected the work to be performed free of charge because my business supposedly owed the neighborhood for years of operating beside their subdivision. I read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. My father always said that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe nobody can tell them no. Rebecca had just revealed more than she realized. I walked around the Mercedes slowly, running my eyes over every panel without touching the paint. The front bumper carried a long scrape. One rear wheel had fresh curb rash. There was a shallow dent above the passenger side rear fender, probably from someone backing into a shopping cart return. Nothing serious. Nothing that justified dumping a luxury sedan inside another person's locked workshop without permission. The more interesting question was how it had gotten there. My shop doors were secured every night. The security system recorded every entrance. Every employee had their own access code, and I changed them whenever someone left the company. There was only one explanation that made sense. Someone had entered after business hours believing they had every right to do it. I walked into my office and powered on the security monitor. 8 cameras blinked to life across the screen. The timestamp rolled backward until it reached the previous evening. There it was. At exactly 9:27, headlights swept across the parking lot. Rebecca's white Mercedes rolled through the unlocked front gate that I always left open until 10 o'clock because customers occasionally picked up vehicles after work. She climbed out wearing a cream-colored raincoat and carrying the same envelope now sitting in my pocket. What surprised me was not that she entered the property. It was what happened next. Instead of walking to the office door, she looked around, found the spare key lockbox used only for late customer drop-offs, and typed in the access code without hesitation. My stomach tightened. That code changed every month and was provided only to scheduled customers. She unlocked the side entrance, drove her own car into Bay 3, parked it neatly, placed the envelope beneath the windshield wiper, locked the vehicle, turned off the lights, and walked away carrying her purse as though she had simply checked into a hotel. No permission, no contract, no phone call, just complete confidence that someone else would solve her problem because she had decided they would. I replayed the footage twice. The camera never lied, and neither did time. My phone buzzed before I could save the recording. The screen displayed a familiar name. Mike Dawson. My oldest employee had been with me for 12 years. He could rebuild a transmission with the radio playing and carry on a conversation without missing a single bolt. I answered, and before I could say good morning, he laughed. Please tell me I am not imagining what is sitting in Bay 3. I looked through the office window toward the Mercedes. You are not imagining it. He let out a long whistle. That is Rebecca's car, is it not? It is. Did she actually leave it here overnight? According to 8 different cameras, she certainly did. There was a pause before Mike quietly said the words I had already been thinking. Luke, she really believes nobody will ever tell her no. I looked back at the silent Mercedes sitting under the fluorescent lights, perfectly polished except for the damage she expected me to erase for free. Outside, the rain continued tapping across the metal roof with slow, patient rhythm. Inside, my workshop remained exactly what it had always been, my property, my livelihood, and a place where every job started with one simple rule. The owner asked before anyone picked up a wrench. Mike arrived 15 minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee, and the first thing he did was stop in front of Bay 3 without saying a word. He slowly walked around the Mercedes, keeping his hands in his jacket pockets, then looked at me with the same expression someone wears after finding a shopping cart in the middle of their living room. She really did it, he finally said. I nodded and handed him the printed security stills that I had captured from the overnight footage. He studied each page carefully. Rebecca opening the lockbox. Rebecca unlocking the side entrance. Rebecca driving into the building. Rebecca leaving on foot as though she owned the place. Every photograph included a clear timestamp in the corner. Mike let out a quiet laugh that carried more disbelief than amusement. She handed you the evidence herself. I folded the papers back into a manila folder. Sometimes people get so comfortable ignoring boundaries that they stop noticing them altogether. By 7:30 the shop had begun to wake up. The familiar rhythm returned. Air tools buzzed. A delivery truck dropped off sheet steel. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with motor oil and cutting fluid. Customers arrived one by one. each with ordinary problems that could be solved through patience and skilled hands. I deliberately left the Mercedes exactly where Rebecca had parked it. Nobody touched it. Nobody inspected it beyond the visual walk-around I had already completed. No repair order existed. No estimate had been approved. No authorization had been signed. As far as my business records were concerned, it was simply an unauthorized vehicle occupying valuable workspace. Around 8:45, my office phone rang. The caller identification displayed Rebecca Whitmore. I answered with my usual greeting. Harrison Metal Works. This is Luke. Her voice carried the calm confidence of someone expecting complete obedience. Good morning, Luke. I trust you found my vehicle. I did. Excellent. I will stop by Friday afternoon to pick it up. Please make sure the scratches and dent are completely gone. I expect factory quality. I glanced through the office window toward Bay 3. Rebecca, we do not have a repair agreement. There was a brief silence before she responded with a faint laugh. You do not need paperwork for something this simple. Consider it a goodwill gesture toward the community. That is not how my business operates. Your business benefits from our neighborhood every single day. My customers choose to come here. Her tone sharpened just enough to reveal the impatience beneath the polished manners. Do not make this more complicated than it needs to be. I answered as calmly as I had spoken to every customer for the past 2 decades. Every vehicle that enters this shop follows the same process. Written authorization, inspection, estimate, approval, payment. Surely you can make one exception. I cannot. Another pause settled over the line. I could almost picture her standing beside her kitchen window, convinced that repeating herself would somehow change reality. Luke, I already left the car. The decision has been made. I looked once more at the security photographs lying neatly on my desk. Actually, the decision to leave it here was yours. She ended the call without another word. Mike had overheard enough to understand exactly how the conversation ended. He leaned against the doorway with crossed arms and raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. She thinks dropping off a luxury sedan automatically creates a repair contract. Something like that. He shook his head. She has never spent a day running a business. The morning continued, but the story spread faster than I expected. A parts supplier noticed the unfamiliar Mercedes inside the shop. A customer restoring an old Chevrolet pickup asked whether we had started working on imported luxury cars. I simply smiled and said the vehicle was waiting on paperwork. Technically, that was true. Shortly before lunch, I opened the folder containing every previous interaction I had ever documented with Rebecca. Warning letters, complaint notices, emails, certified mail receipts, photographs. Most business owners eventually learn that good records are as valuable as good tools. Looking through the growing stack reminded me that this had never really been about one car. It had been about someone who believed rules existed only for everyone else. As I closed the folder, my eyes drifted toward the welding station near the far wall. Fresh wire sat neatly loaded in the machine. My heavy leather gloves rested beside a clean welding helmet exactly where I had left them the night before. At that moment, I was not thinking about revenge. I was thinking about property, responsibility, and the simple fact that every problem eventually reaches the point where it must be solved instead of ignored. The afternoon settled into its usual rhythm, but there was nothing ordinary about the empty space the Mercedes continued to occupy inside Bay 3. Every hour that passed cost my business valuable floor space, and every customer who stepped inside asked the same question with different words. I gave everyone the same answer. The vehicle was waiting for authorization from its owner before any work could begin. That statement was completely true, and it also happened to frustrate the one person who believed truth could be negotiated. Just after 1 o'clock, a black sport utility vehicle pulled into the parking lot, followed a few seconds later by the familiar white sedan that had dropped Rebecca off. She stepped through the front door wearing another perfectly tailored outfit, sunglasses resting on top of her head despite the cloudy sky outside. She did not greet anyone. She did not acknowledge the customers waiting near the counter. She walked directly toward my office as though the building belonged to her. "Luke," she said without waiting for an invitation. "I came by to check on the progress." I stood from my desk and calmly closed the customer file I had been reviewing. "There is no progress to report." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I explained this morning. I do not have a signed repair authorization." She waved one hand dismissively. "That is just paperwork. Paperwork protects both of us. It slows everything down. It keeps misunderstandings from becoming legal problems. Rebecca let out an impatient sigh before walking toward Bay 3. She circled the Mercedes once, then turned back toward me with visible disbelief. You have not even started. Correct. I expected this to be finished by Friday. You expected something that was never agreed to. Several customers had quietly stopped pretending not to listen. Mike continued organizing tools nearby, saying nothing, but I could tell he was paying close attention. Rebecca lowered her voice as if that somehow made her demands more reasonable. Luke, I am giving you an opportunity to support your community. By repairing your personal vehicle without authorization or payment. By showing goodwill. I smiled politely. Goodwill begins with respect. Her expression hardened. You are making a mistake. I disagree. The association has influence. The association does not operate this property. She folded her arms. You seem very confident. Because county records are very clear. For the first time since entering the shop, she looked genuinely annoyed that the conversation was not following the script she had imagined. She reached into her purse and removed a business card before placing it on my workbench. Send me the invoice if you absolutely insist. I will review it. I glanced at the card but did not pick it up. There cannot be an invoice because there cannot be repairs without authorization. She stared at me for several long seconds, then laughed quietly as though I had just told an amusing joke. You really intend to let my car sit here? Until its owner follows the same process as every other customer. She shook her head in disbelief. Nobody has ever spoken to me like this. Nobody has ever parked a vehicle inside my shop without permission. That answer ended the conversation more effectively than any raised voice could have. Rebecca turned sharply and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with quick, irritated steps. Halfway to the door, she stopped beside the large metal sign mounted near the entrance. It had been hanging there since my father opened the business decades earlier. White letters against a dark blue background read, "Unauthorized vehicles will be secured at owner's expense." I watched her eyes move across every word before she looked back at me. That sign is for abandoned cars. It applies to unauthorized vehicles. Surely you are not suggesting mine qualifies. You entered private property without permission, left the vehicle overnight, and declined to complete the required paperwork. She said nothing. Instead, she pushed open the front door and disappeared into the parking lot. Through the office window, I watched her climb into the waiting sport utility vehicle without another glance toward the Mercedes. Mike slowly walked over after she left, his eyes still fixed on the sign by the entrance. Funny how she never noticed that before. I looked from the sign to the welding station at the far end of the shop, where my helmet, gloves, and freshly loaded machine waited exactly where I had left them. Every important detail was already in place. All that remained was deciding the smartest, most lawful way to remind Rebecca that private property was not a suggestion and that every rule she expected others to follow applied to her as well. By closing time, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the parking lot coated in a thin layer of water that reflected every light above the shop doors. I locked the customer entrance, flipped the sign to closed, and stood quietly in the middle of Bay 3 looking at the Mercedes. It had not moved an inch since Rebecca left it there. Neither had my position. I had not touched the paint. I had not opened a door. I had not even checked the mileage. The only thing that had changed was the amount of documentation sitting inside the folder on my desk. Every phone call had been logged. Every security recording had been copied to 2 separate drives. Every conversation had been summarized while the details were still fresh in my mind. Running a business had taught me that memory fades, but paperwork rarely does. Mike walked over carrying the shop tablet and handed it to me. You should probably see this. He had pulled up the exterior security camera from earlier that afternoon. Rebecca had not simply walked out after our conversation. She had paused beside the front gate, taken several photographs of my building, and spent nearly 5 minutes talking on her phone while pointing toward the workshop. There was no audio, but I did not need it to understand what she was doing. She was already building her version of the story. The difference was that mine came with timestamps. She is planning something, Mike said. Probably, I answered. Then why are you so calm? I smiled. Because people who plan around assumptions usually forget to check the facts. The next morning confirmed exactly what I expected. Before I even finished my first cup of coffee, an envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was another letter from the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. This one claimed that my business had created a nuisance by refusing to cooperate with community leadership and requested that I remove what it called an unauthorized commercial eyesore from the neighborhood. I read it twice before placing it beside the previous letter. The irony almost made me laugh. Rebecca wanted me to remove a vehicle that she herself had placed inside my private building without permission. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. I called my attorney, Daniel Brooks, a practical man who believed that emotions belonged outside legal decisions. After listening to the entire situation without interrupting, he asked only 3 questions. Do you have the security footage? Yes. Did you authorize the vehicle to be left there? No. Have you damaged the vehicle in any way? Not at all. There was a brief silence before he answered. Good. Keep it that way. Continue documenting everything. Do not argue. Do not speculate. Let her keep making decisions. Those last 5 words stayed with me all morning. Let her keep making decisions. Sometimes the fastest way to expose unreasonable behavior is simply refusing to participate in it. Around 10 o'clock, another customer wandered into the office while waiting for an estimate on his pickup truck. He glanced toward Bay 3 and quietly asked, "Is that the HOA President's Mercedes?" News traveled surprisingly fast in small communities. I nodded without offering any details. He chuckled to himself. She always tells everybody else to respect private property. I simply smiled and changed the subject. My business was repairing vehicles, not fueling neighborhood gossip. By early afternoon, I had almost forgotten about the Mercedes while finishing weld repairs on the Mustang frame. The bright blue arc illuminated the shop with every precise movement of the torch, and tiny sparks bounced harmlessly across the steel work table before fading into darkness. The familiar rhythm settled my thoughts. Every bead had a purpose. Every measurement mattered. Good craftsmanship depended on patience more than speed. When I finally removed my helmet, I noticed Mike standing near the office window, looking toward the parking lot again. "Company," he said. I followed his gaze. Rebecca had returned, this time accompanied by 2 members of the HOA board. They stepped out of another vehicle carrying clipboards and wearing expressions that suggested they expected immediate surrender. I set my welding helmet on the bench, removed my gloves, and brushed a few harmless flecks of metal dust from my work shirt. Everything inside me remained perfectly calm. They believed they were arriving to pressure a mechanic into giving them what they wanted. They had no idea they were walking into a shop where every camera was recording, every conversation would be remembered, and every decision from this point forward would carry consequences far beyond a simple luxury sedan. Rebecca did not bother introducing the 2 people walking beside her because she assumed I already understood their purpose. One was a man in his early 60s wearing a navy blazer with an HOA badge clipped to the pocket. The other was a woman carrying a leather folder so tightly under one arm that it looked more like a shield than a notebook. All 3 of them stepped into my workshop with the confidence of people expecting immediate compliance. I met them near the front counter before they could wander any farther inside. "Good afternoon," I said. "Can I help you?" Rebecca smiled politely, but it was the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Luke, these are members of the association board. They wanted to discuss your refusal to cooperate." "My refusal to accept an unauthorized vehicle?" I asked. Neither board member answered immediately. Instead, the older gentleman cleared his throat. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding." I reached beneath the counter and placed a clean repair authorization form in front of them. "I agree. That is why every customer fills out one of these before work begins." Rebecca glanced at the paper without touching it. "This is unnecessary. It is required. You are hiding behind paperwork. I am following the same policy that applies to every customer who walks through this door." The woman with the leather folder finally spoke. "Could we simply arrange for the repairs today and settle the billing later?" "Certainly," I answered. "The moment the owner signs the authorization, approves the estimate, and accepts responsibility for the work, we can schedule the vehicle like every other customer." Rebecca folded her arms. "I already told you that I expect this to be handled as a courtesy. And I already explained that my business does not operate on expectations. It operates on agreements." The shop fell quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Even my customers seemed to sense that something important was unfolding. The older board member looked toward Bay 3 where the Mercedes remained untouched beneath the bright lights. "Has anything been done to the vehicle?" he asked. "Nothing at all," I replied. It has remained exactly where it was left without my permission. I opened the folder that had continued growing thicker over the past 2 days. Inside were printed photographs, copies of letters, notes from every phone conversation, and still images from the security cameras. I carefully spread several pages across the counter. This is the vehicle entering my property after business hours. This is the owner accessing a secure lockbox without authorization. This is the vehicle being parked inside my building. These timestamps show exactly when everything occurred. The 2 board members leaned closer. Their expressions slowly changed from confidence to concern as they examined each page. Rebecca did not look at the documents. Instead, she stared directly at me. You really documented all of this? Every business owner should. The older gentleman removed his glasses and quietly asked Rebecca, Did you enter the workshop without permission? She hesitated just long enough to answer the question without actually answering it. I was solving a problem efficiently. He looked back down at the photographs. That is not what these images show. For the first time since this entire situation began, I noticed uncertainty replacing certainty. Rebecca had expected support. Instead, she was watching members of her own board read evidence she had unknowingly created herself. I closed the folder and returned it to the counter. I am not interested in arguing with anyone. I simply expect my property to be respected the same way everyone expects theirs to be respected. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Then the woman carrying the leather folder looked toward the large blue sign near the entrance. She slowly read each word aloud. Unauthorized vehicles will be secured at owner's expense. She turned back toward Rebecca. Was that sign there when you entered? Rebecca did not answer. She did not need to. The security photographs already had. After another uncomfortable silence, the older board member thanked me for my time and quietly suggested that they continue the discussion elsewhere. Rebecca clearly wanted to stay, but neither of her companions moved toward Bay 3 again. They simply walked back toward the exit, leaving her with little choice except to follow. As the front door closed behind them, Mike stepped out from the service area with a thoughtful expression. Well, he said, they finally stopped talking about authority and started looking at facts. I looked across the shop toward the welding station where my helmet, gloves, clamps, and machine sat exactly as they always had, waiting for careful hands rather than angry ones. At that moment, the path forward became perfectly clear. I was not looking for revenge. I was looking for a lawful way to secure an unauthorized vehicle that had been left inside my private workshop, using the skills I had spent a lifetime mastering and without causing unnecessary damage to anything except one person's misplaced confidence. The next morning I arrived earlier than usual. The sun had barely cleared the trees, and the cool air still carried the damp smell of last night's rain mixed with fresh-cut grass from the property next door. Inside the shop, everything was exactly as I had left it. The compressor rumbled to life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rebecca's Mercedes still occupied Bay 3 as though it had been there for years instead of days. I stood quietly for a moment looking at the blue sign near the entrance, then at the security cameras mounted high along the walls. Every angle was recording. Every minute was documented. I called Daniel before I touched a single tool. I want to secure the vehicle so it cannot be removed until the ownership dispute is resolved, I said. No damage. No permanent modifications. Completely reversible. He paused before answering. If your intention is to prevent unauthorized removal while preserving the vehicle and documenting everything, make certain whatever you do can be undone without permanent harm. Photograph every step before and after. That was exactly what I intended. I hung up, printed another copy of the security photographs, and placed them beside the growing file. Mike walked over carrying his coffee. You have that look, he said. What look? The one you get when you already solved the problem in your head. I smiled. I finally remembered something my father taught me. Mike leaned against the workbench. What was that? There is always a difference between destroying something and securing it. We spent nearly half an hour inspecting the Mercedes without opening it. I photographed every body panel, every window, every door seam, every wheel, and every inch of paint. The condition report was more detailed than many insurance inspections I had seen. Then I positioned padded welding blankets over every nearby surface that might be affected by stray sparks. Additional heat shields covered the trim around each latch area. My goal was not to punish a luxury car. It had done nothing wrong. The goal was to secure an unauthorized vehicle that its owner refused to retrieve through normal procedures. Mike handed me my leather gloves without saying a word. I lowered the welding helmet over my face, adjusted the settings on the machine, and carefully positioned a pair of removable steel security tabs across the leading edge of the driver's door. They were attached with small, precise tack welds to temporary brackets fixed onto a custom external frame designed specifically to avoid permanent contact with the painted body panels. Anyone looking quickly would think the doors had been welded shut, but every attachment could later be removed cleanly with ordinary shop procedures and without altering the vehicle itself. My father had always believed the best metalwork was the kind nobody noticed after it was finished. The torch came alive with its familiar blue arc, and tiny sparks danced harmlessly against the protected steel frame. The smell of warm metal filled the bay while the soft crackling sound echoed through the workshop. Every movement was slow, measured, and deliberate. I repeated the same process around each door using identical brackets, documenting every step with photographs before and after each weld. Nothing touched the paint. Nothing entered the cabin. Nothing affected the mechanical operation of the vehicle. The car was simply secured against immediate use while remaining fully protected. When I finally lifted my helmet, Mike walked around the Mercedes twice before nodding with quiet approval. That is the cleanest piece of fabrication I have ever seen for a problem nobody else would have imagined. I laughed. I hope I never need to imagine it again. Less than an hour later, the front doors opened with enough force to rattle the glass. Rebecca strode inside, carrying her keys, clearly expecting to drive away. She pressed the key fob. The lights flashed. She reached for the driver's handle. It did not move. She tried the passenger side, then the rear doors. Her confident expression slowly disappeared as she noticed the carefully fabricated steel brackets securing each opening. She turned toward me with stunned disbelief. "What did you do?" I removed my safety glasses and calmly placed them on the workbench. "Your unauthorized vehicle has been secured while it remains on private property." She stared at the brackets, then back at me. "You cannot be serious." I reached beneath the counter and slid a neatly prepared folder toward her. Inside were photographs, timestamps, copies of every previous letter, the condition report, and a written notice explaining that the vehicle would remain secured until the owner completed the proper release process or arranged lawful removal through the appropriate procedures. For the first time since this entire situation began, Rebecca had no immediate answer. She simply stood in complete silence, looking not at me, but at the consequences of assuming that someone else's property, time, and business belonged to her. Rebecca finally picked up the folder with slow, careful movements, as though she expected the documents inside to somehow change if she waited long enough. They did not. She flipped through the photographs one page at a time. There was the security footage showing her entering my property after business hours. There was the image of her opening the secure lockbox. There were timestamps documenting every minute her Mercedes remained inside my workshop without authorization. Then came the detailed condition report with dozens of photographs proving the vehicle had not been damaged. Finally, she reached the notice explaining that the temporary security brackets had been installed to prevent unauthorized removal while the ownership dispute over possession of the vehicle was being resolved through proper procedures. She closed the folder without saying a word. For several long seconds, the only sound inside the shop came from an impact wrench somewhere in the back and the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then she reached for her phone. "I am calling the police," she announced confidently. "That is your choice," I answered. "Would you like me to have the security footage ready for them?" She hesitated for the briefest moment before dialing anyway. Less than 30 minutes later, a patrol vehicle rolled into the parking lot. Officer Sarah Collins stepped inside carrying a notepad and wearing the calm expression of someone who had responded to far more unusual calls than this one. Rebecca immediately began explaining that I had trapped her vehicle and refused to release it. Officer Collins listened politely without interrupting, then turned toward me. "Sir, I would like to hear your side." I handed her the same folder Rebecca had just finished reading. "Everything is documented in chronological order," I said. "The security footage is also available if you would like to review it." She spent several minutes studying the paperwork before asking to see the video recordings. Mike loaded the files onto the office monitor while Officer Collins watched from beginning to end. Rebecca remained unusually quiet throughout the playback. Every important moment appeared exactly as it had happened. The unauthorized entry, the use of the lockbox, the vehicle being parked inside the building, the owner leaving without speaking to anyone. When the recording ended, Officer Collins looked toward Rebecca. Did these events occur substantially as shown? Rebecca shifted her weight before answering. I was simply trying to have my vehicle repaired. Without permission? The officer asked. Rebecca did not immediately respond. Officer Collins then examined the photographs documenting the installation of the temporary security brackets. She walked around the Mercedes herself, taking a close look at each attachment point. These appear to be external security devices, she observed. They are removable. Yes, I answered. They were intentionally designed to avoid permanent modification to the vehicle. The entire process is documented. She nodded thoughtfully before writing several notes. This appears to be a civil property dispute rather than a criminal matter. I recommend both parties resolve it through proper legal channels. Rebecca looked genuinely surprised. You are not going to make him remove them? Officer Collins answered calmly. I am not seeing evidence that the vehicle has been permanently damaged, and the documentation indicates it was left here without authorization. I cannot order either party to surrender their legal position today. After the officer left, Rebecca immediately called someone else. Within an hour, a tow truck arrived, followed shortly afterward by an attorney representing her. The attorney introduced himself professionally and asked whether we could review the documentation together. Unlike Rebecca, he read every page carefully before asking thoughtful questions instead of making demands. When he finished, he quietly requested permission to inspect the security brackets himself. I agreed. He spent several minutes examining the fabrication before turning back toward his client. These appear to be temporary and professionally installed, he said. Removing them here without cooperation could create unnecessary complications. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. Whose side are you on? He answered with remarkable honesty. I am on the side of the facts. Those 6 words changed the entire atmosphere inside the workshop. For the first time since this situation began, nobody was talking about titles, authority, or influence. Every conversation centered on documents, evidence, procedures, and responsibility. The tow truck driver quietly waited outside. The attorney continued reviewing the paperwork, and Rebecca stood beside her own Mercedes, realizing that every shortcut she had taken over the previous few days had slowly closed every easy exit she thought would always be available. The confidence she had carried into my workshop had finally been replaced by something much more powerful and much less comfortable: accountability. The attorney requested a private conversation with Rebecca, and the two of them stepped outside while the tow truck driver leaned against his truck with folded arms, patiently waiting to find out whether he would actually have a job that afternoon. Nearly 20 minutes passed before they returned. The confidence Rebecca had worn like a badge since the first day she entered my workshop had quietly disappeared. Her attorney approached the counter first. Mr. Harrison, he said, extending his hand. My client would like to resolve this matter today. I shook his hand. I have wanted that since the beginning. He nodded and placed a prepared document on the counter. It acknowledged that the Mercedes had been left inside my workshop without authorization, accepted responsibility for the storage fees that had accumulated during the dispute, agreed to cover the cost of fabricating and professionally removing the temporary security brackets, and confirmed that no repair work had ever been requested through the proper procedures. Every line reflected exactly what had happened. No exaggeration, no revenge, just facts. Rebecca stood quietly beside him while I read the agreement from beginning to end. Daniel, my attorney, reviewed it over a video call and simply smiled. Everything appears to be in order. If both parties sign, this matter is finished. Rebecca signed first. Her signature looked noticeably less confident than the bold handwriting on the first letter she had left under the windshield wiper. I signed beneath hers, and with that, nearly a week of unnecessary conflict ended with 2 names on one sheet of paper. Mike rolled the welding cart back into Bay 3 while I put on my gloves one last time. Removing the security brackets took far less time than installing them. Each small tack weld separated cleanly from the temporary frame exactly as planned. Every protective blanket had done its job. Every photograph matched the vehicle's original condition report. When the final bracket came away, I stepped back and invited Rebecca's attorney to inspect the Mercedes. He walked around it carefully, checking each door, every body panel, and every painted surface. One by one, the doors opened smoothly. Nothing had been bent. Nothing had been permanently altered. The attorney looked at me and nodded with genuine respect. That is remarkably precise workmanship. I smiled. Precision has always been more valuable than anger. Rebecca slowly walked to the driver's door and rested one hand on the handle before turning toward me. For a moment I expected another argument. Instead, she quietly said, "I should have asked." They were the first honest words I had heard from her since this entire situation began. I answered just as quietly. That would have saved everyone a great deal of time. She gave a small nod, climbed into the Mercedes, and drove away without another word. The tow truck driver waved as he left, grateful that his afternoon had become much simpler than expected. The attorney thanked me for keeping detailed records before following his client out of the parking lot. By sunset, the workshop had returned to exactly what it had always been. The Mustang sat back in Bay 2 waiting for its restoration. The familiar smell of steel and motor oil filled the air. Country music drifted softly from the old speaker above my toolbox. It felt as though the building itself had taken a deep breath. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Several residents from Willow Creek Estates began bringing their vehicles to my shop after hearing the complete story from people who had seen the documents rather than the rumors. More importantly, they told me they appreciated seeing someone stand firm without shouting, threatening, or losing control. Respect, they said, looked different than they had imagined. A month later, I received a short envelope in the mail. Inside was a notice from the association announcing updated procedures requiring board members to obtain written permission before entering private commercial property for any reason. I quietly filed it beside the rest of the documents. I never framed the photographs. I never posted the security footage online. I never celebrated what happened because there was nothing to celebrate about neighbors turning ordinary disagreements into unnecessary conflicts. The real victory was much simpler. My father had been right all those years ago. Patient hands build strong things. Angry hands ruin them. That week I did not win because I was louder, richer, or more powerful. I won because I stayed calm long enough to let the facts do the talking. Every document mattered. Every camera mattered. Every careful decision mattered. And in the end, the strongest weld I made was not the temporary steel holding a luxury car exactly where it belonged. It was the lesson that respect for another person's property begins with asking permission, because justice is never about humiliating someone. It is about proving that integrity, patience, and the rule of law will always outlast arrogance.